Put a person inside a brain scanner and show them a photograph of themselves. The neural response is immediate and specific. Now show them a photograph of a complete stranger. The pattern shifts. Now show them a photograph of who they will be in 20 or 30 years, their future self. Research by Hal Hirschfield at UCLA suggests what happens next is counterintuitive. The neural activation pattern resembles the stranger condition far more than the self condition. Your brain, at a functional level, may not recognize the person you are going to become. It appears to categorize that future person differently from the self you experience today. This single finding, if it replicates and generalizes across populations, may explain more about financial behavior than 50 years of economic theory combined. Because if your future self is neurologically a stranger, then saving for retirement is not self-investment. It is charity towards someone you do not particularly know. This is Neuro Wealth Company. We examine the neuroscience and behavioral science behind financial decision-making, not to motivate you, but to explain what the evidence says is actually happening inside the cognitive system generating your choices. Today's subject is the future self problem, the foundational mechanism underlying why people consistently fail to save adequately, consistently make financial decisions they later regret, and consistently find that good intentions do not translate into changed behavior. By the end of this video, you will have a precise, evidence-based explanation for why willpower and motivation are structurally insufficient for this problem, and what the research suggests actually changes behavior. We will cover 3 areas: the neuroscience mechanism itself, why conventional financial advice has this structurally wrong, and the practical framework that emerges when you follow where the evidence leads. We start with the architecture of the problem. In 2004, Samuel McClure and colleagues at Princeton published an fMRI study that would become foundational to behavioral economics. They presented subjects with choices between monetary rewards available immediately versus the same or larger rewards available at a delay. The neural data revealed a structural distinction. Immediate reward options produce significantly stronger activation in areas of the brain associated with emotional and reward processing. Delayed reward options more selectively engage the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with deliberate, long-term reasoning. This is not a picture of people failing to think clearly. It is a picture of different neural systems being deployed depending on the temporal distance of the reward. The architecture itself creates asymmetry. The future is not just abstractly harder to value, it is processed by a different cognitive system, one that is less viscerally engaged with the outcome. Now consider what the economist David Laibson identified in 1997, what economists call hyperbolic discounting. Laibson documented that people tend to prioritize present rewards over future rewards even when the future rewards are significantly larger. The critical feature is not that people are impatient in some uniform way. It is that they are inconsistently impatient. Ask someone whether they would prefer a moderate reward in 30 days or a slightly larger one in 31 days. Most will wait the extra day. But ask those same people whether they want that moderate reward right now or the slightly larger one tomorrow, and the calculation changes dramatically for many of them. The presence of immediacy is not a small perturbation on a rational calculation. It activates a different mode of neural processing. This is not a design flaw in human cognition so much as an evolutionary feature now operating in the wrong environment, one shaped for immediate resource scarcity that is now navigating 30-year mortgage decisions and pension contributions. Robert Strauss had formalized the mathematical structure of this pattern as early as 1955, describing what he called time-inconsistent preferences. The observation that preferences about intertemporal trade-offs shift systematically depending on temporal distance. The present has a gravitational pull that cannot be explained by rational self-interest alone. What took another 50 years to establish was the underlying mechanism. The inconsistency reflects how the brain physically represents time and the self across time. And this is where the future self research becomes genuinely important. If your future self is represented more like another person than like yourself, then you are not choosing between spending money now and investing in your own future. You may be choosing between spending money on yourself now and giving it to someone you do not particularly feel connected to. The weaker the felt continuity between present self and future self, research in this area suggests, the stronger the behavioral pull toward the present. The financial decisions that matter most, retirement contributions, emergency savings, long-horizon investment, are precisely the decisions most vulnerable to this effect. They involve the largest temporal distances and the most abstract future rewards. This channel covers behavioral neuroscience and financial decision-making at this level every week. No self-help framing, no motivation, just the evidence and its implications. If that is a gap you want filled, subscribe. We are not done with the science yet. In 2000, Antoine Becquerel and colleagues published research demonstrating that the ventromedial prefrontal cortex plays a critical role in decisions involving future rewards. Crucially, damage to this region produces a characteristic dissociation. Individuals can articulate exactly why their choices are suboptimal. They understand the long-term consequences, and they still consistently make the impulsive choice. The gap between knowing and doing is not a character flaw. It is a documented feature of the underlying neurobiology, and it has a direct implication for financial advice. Strategies that operate only at the level of information and understanding are targeting a system that is not the primary driver of the problematic behavior. You can know everything there is to know about compound interest and still not save. The knowledge and the behavior are not necessarily running on the same neural infrastructure. Now add a second layer from behavioral research. Work by Markman and colleagues in 2007 found that people tend to be overly optimistic about their future selves, predicting that their future version will be more motivated, more disciplined, more capable than they actually turn out to be when that future arrives. This is a systematic bias. The direction is consistent, the future self is reliably idealized. The conventional response to this finding is to recommend more realistic planning, better forecasts, more honest self-assessment. But this misunderstands the mechanism. The idealization of the future self is a direct consequence of its psychological distance. We extend generous assumptions to distant others. The future self is, in a neural and representational sense, a distant other. Adding a correction factor to a miscalibrated model does not fix the underlying model. There is also significant individual variation in what researchers call future self-continuity. The felt sense that the person you will be is genuinely the same person as the person you are now. Research in this area indicates that this sense of continuity is not fixed, and that it appears to influence financial behavior in meaningful ways. Someone who experiences strong psychological continuity with their future self makes different financial decisions than someone for whom the future self is essentially a stranger in the full emotional and representational sense. The variable driving these differences does not appear to be intelligence, income, or financial literacy. It appears to be something more like the vividness and concreteness of the internal representation of the future self. A blurry, abstract future person is easy to sacrifice for present comfort. A specific, vivid, emotionally proximate future person is considerably harder to ignore. What makes this particularly relevant is the timeline involved in the financial decisions that matter most. Retirement planning operates across decades. Every significant financial choice involves a future self, and the more distant that future self, the research suggests, the more likely it is to be represented as a stranger rather than as a continuation of who you are today. Everything we have covered so far is the mechanism, the why. Here is where it becomes directly useful, because the conventional financial advice industry has built its dominant frameworks on an incomplete model of this problem. 3 ways the standard advice gets it structurally wrong, and what should replace each one. The first failure is the information model. Financial literacy programs, retirement calculators, and compound interest demonstrations all operate on the assumption that people make poor financial decisions because they lack the relevant information. The evidence does not particularly support this. The neural architecture problem, present bias, hyperbolic discounting, the future self as stranger, operates independently of financial knowledge. People who fully understand the mathematics of retirement savings still undersave. People who can articulate the cost of carrying high-interest debt still carry it. Knowing is not sufficient. The intervention is targeting the wrong system. The second failure is the motivation model. visualization exercises, goal-setting frameworks, and vision boards attempt to make the future feel more desirable, on the theory that stronger motivation will overcome present bias. The problem is that motivation operates at the level of conscious intention, and the gap between intention and behavior is precisely what this body of research documents. Peter Gollwitzer's work on implementation intentions, beginning in 1993, makes a distinction that most advice frameworks consistently obscure. Gollwitzer found that the intention-action gap is not closed by stronger intentions. It is closed by specificity. The research indicates that concrete, predetermined plans, specifying exactly when, where, and how a behavior will occur, produce meaningfully different outcomes than vague commitments. Intending to save more is structurally different from specifying that a fixed amount will transfer automatically on the day payroll clears. The specification is not a detail. It is the operative variable. The third failure is the willpower assumption, the implicit premise that financial discipline is a matter of self-control that can be summoned through greater commitment and stronger character. Research by Tangney and colleagues in 2004 found that the capacity to delay gratification is associated with positive outcomes, but the mechanism appears to be less about raw willpower deployed in the moment, and more about how the decision environment is structured in advance. People who consistently make patient, long-term financial decisions tend to live in environments where those decisions are the default. They are not grinding through temptation repeatedly. They have removed the decision from the equation. The lesson across all three failures is the same. The gap between financial intention and financial behavior is not a willpower gap. It is an architecture gap. And architecture problems require architecture solutions. 3 evidence-based interventions emerge from this research, and they are structurally different from conventional financial advice. First, environment design over willpower. Richard Thaler and colleagues demonstrated in 2006 that automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans leads to significantly higher participation rates compared to opt-in systems. The behavior change is not motivational. The decision architecture does the work. When saving is the default and inaction means participating rather than abstaining, participation increases substantially. The implication is direct. Financial behaviors oriented toward future rewards should be automated wherever the system allows, removing the present bias decision from the process entirely. The relevant question is not whether you will choose to save next month when the moment arrives. It is whether your system requires you to make that choice at all. Second, increasing the vividness of the future self. Peters and colleagues found in 2011 that using mental imagery to make future rewards more vivid and concrete can increase willingness to save. The mechanism maps directly onto the future self continuity research. If the future self is neurologically distant, interventions that reduce that psychological distance, that make the future self feel more specific and continuous, should attenuate the discount. Kahneman and colleagues found in 1991 that presenting future rewards in a more concrete and vivid way increases willingness to delay gratification. The goal of these techniques is not inspiration. It is neurospecificity, converting a vague, stranger-like future person into a more represented, concrete entity in your cognitive landscape. Writing from the perspective of your future self, or writing specifically to the person you intend to be at a defined age, are techniques that research in this area supports. Third, implementation intentions applied to financial decisions. Following Gollwitzer's framework, the question to answer is not whether you intend to save, but precisely what will trigger the saving behavior, under what conditions, and through what mechanism. Specifying the exact trigger, the exact action, and the exact system, rather than holding a general intention to do better, is what the evidence identifies as the operative variable. Design the environment, specify the implementation, and reduce the decision to the minimum necessary choice. That is the framework the evidence supports. The future self problem is not a motivation problem. It is a neural architecture problem, documented across 7 decades of research, from Strotz in 1955 to McClure's imaging work in 2004 to the ongoing investigation of future self-continuity and its financial consequences. The brain you are using to plan your financial future is the same brain that may be treating your future self as a stranger, discounting future rewards at a rate no financial model fully accounts for, and reliably failing to convert intention into behavior when the environment does not enforce the decision. That is not a moral failing. It is a description of a system operating as designed in the wrong context. And precision about the actual problem is where useful interventions begin. This channel covers behavioral neuroscience and financial decision-making at this level every week. Subscribe, and next we cover loss aversion, why the same neural systems that distort your relationship with your future self also make losses feel significantly more painful than equivalent gains, and what the research says to do about it. That video is on screen now.